Can you tell us a bit about how your day has gone since?
Yes, I have very little sleep. It was 1 o'clock in the morning, and I'd probably had about an hour's sleep by the time the phone went. I'm in California. And since then, I've probably had about one more hour's sleep. So I'm rather sleep deprived now. And it's just been lots and lots of people trying to get in touch with me, but also lots of messages from old friends from years ago I haven't seen in a long time. And that's been very nice.
Our next question comes from Isabel Kirkwood at BetaKit, again for Professor Hinton. She asks, Professor Hinton, how do you reconcile receiving this recognition with your outspokenness about the need to slow AI advancement and the risks that technology poses?
I've never recommended slowing the advancement of AI because I don't think that's feasible. AI has so many good effects, like in healthcare, but in pretty much all industries, that I think there's no chance of us slowing the development of it. So can you say the second half of the question again?
Absolutely. She asks, how do you reconcile receiving this recognition with their outspokenness about the need to slow AI advancement and the risks the technology poses?
Okay, so actually the Nobel Committee recognized that my work on talking about safety was relevant here. I can't remember exactly what they said, but they said something about that. I think we need a serious effort to make sure it's safe, because if we can keep it safe, it'll be wonderful.
We have a follow-up, again from Professor Hinton, and again from Issam Ahmed from AFP, who asks, do you think students and even professionals over-relying on LLMs is going to have a dumbing down effect, or will we operate on a higher order?
I don't think it will have a significant dumbing down effect. I think it'll be like what happened when they first had pocket calculators and people said, oh, kids won't learn math anymore. They won't be able to do multiplication. Well, you don't need to be able to do multiplication if you've got a pocket calculator. And I think it'll be the same with LLMs. People maybe won't remember as many facts that you can just ask an LLM and it will know. But I think it'll make people smarter, not dumber.
Thank you. A follow-up from Adrian Gabriel at CTV News. He asks, if I could ask one more question. He says, you used the word flabbergasted when you learned about the award. Why were you so surprised?
I had absolutely no idea that I've even been nominated. I'm not a physicist. I have very high respect for physics. I dropped out of physics after my first year at university because I couldn't do the complicated math. So getting an award in physics was very surprising to me. I'm very pleased that the Nobel Committee recognized that there's been huge progress in the area of artificial neural nets. And Hopfield's work was closely related to physics. And some of the early work I did with Terry Sinofsky on Boltzmann machines was inspired by statistical physics. But more recently, the work has had less relationship to physics. And so I was very surprised that I got a prize in physics.
Our next question comes from Matt O'Brien at Associated Press, who asks of Professor Hinton, can you please elaborate on your comment earlier on the call about Sam Altman?
So OpenAI was set up with a big emphasis on safety. Its primary objective was to develop artificial general intelligence and ensure that it was safe. One of my former students, Ilya Sutskova, was the chief scientist. And over time, it turned out that Sam Altman was much less concerned with safety than with profits. And I think that's unfortunate.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Jessica Coates at PA Media. And this is, again, a question for Professor Hinton. She asks, you mentioned the uncertain future around AI and the need for greater understanding of its potential opportunities and risks. Do you believe governments look at stepping in to regulate AI more strictly? How can governments better support AI research?
I think governments can encourage the big companies to spend more of their resources on safety research. So at present, almost all of the resources go into making the models better, so they can have shiny new models. And there's a big competition going on, and the models are getting much better, and that's good. But we need to accompany that with a comparable effort on AI safety. The effort needs to be more than like 1%. It needs to be like maybe a third of the effort goes into AI safety, because if this stuff becomes unsafe, that's extremely bad.
Our next question is from Tara Deschamps again from CP. She asks of Professor Hinton, any plans for the money that comes with the Nobel yet?
No specific plans. I'm going to give it away to charities, but I know one charity I'll give some to, which provides jobs for neurodiverse young adults. I will give it to some other charities, but I don't know which yet.
Our next question for Professor Hinton, again, is from Hua Lone of Reuters, who asks, do you have any recommendations for how to prevent serious consequences in the future? By that, they mean how people should be careful of AI and its use. As you warned, it can be dangerous.
I don't think individual people being careful in how they use it is going to solve the problems. I think the people developing AI need to be careful how they develop it. And I think research needs to be done in the big companies which have the resources. I'm not convinced that the way individual people use it is going to make much difference.
Our next question is another follow-up from Isam Ahmed. This is at AFP, and again for Professor Hinton. They ask, I know you said it's hard to predict what going bad might mean, but if you had to hazard a stab at some rough areas of concern, what would those be?
So there are many different risks from AI, and they all have different solutions. So immediate risks are things like fake videos corrupting elections. We've already seen politicians either accuse other people of using fake videos or use fake videos themselves and fake images. So that's one immediate danger. There's also very immediate dangers from things like cyber attacks. So last year, for example, there was a 1,200% increase in the number of phishing attacks. And that's because these large language models make it very easy to do phishing attacks. And you can no longer recognize them by the fact the spelling's wrong and the syntax is slightly odd. Their English is perfect.
Next question comes from Victoria Gibson. Again, she's at Toronto Star. And she asks of Professor Hinton, you've spoken a few times today about the provincial government and the Ontario Science Centre. Why is that top of mind as you receive this recognition?
So the Ontario Science Centre was very important in encouraging curiosity in young minds and curiosity about science. It had some problems with the roof and it needed some renovation. The estimate for the renovation was $200 million. But the government then told the people who estimated how much it would cost to multiply that by 1.85 in order to get a much bigger number so that they could then justify knocking it down. And the reasons it was knocked down were not the reasons the government gave, as far as I can see. It could have been repaired, and it would have been much cheaper to repair it.
Next is another question from Tara Deschamps at Canadian Press for Professor Hinton. She says, when people talk about the AI and technology landscape in Canada, your name always comes up as an example of what Canada can achieve. But people also say the country has to be careful not to squander the opportunities you've created. What do you think Canada can do to hold on to its status as a major player in the AI space?
it can keep funding curiosity-driven basic research. That's very important for keeping the best researchers here. But in this age of artificial neural networks, we also need significant computational resources to keep researchers in universities. And the government is trying to do something about that. They set aside $2 billion for computational resources for AI research. So I think they're doing what they can. Obviously, we're a much smaller country than China or the United States. But given the resources they have, I think Canada's doing quite well.
Our next question comes from U of T News's very own Rahul Kalvapelli, who asks of Professor Hinton, you persisted with research in artificial neural networks, even during periods of waning interest in the topic among the scientific community. Do you have a message for professors and students about persisting with endeavors that may be deemed unpopular or futile?
I think my message is this. If you believe in something, don't give up on it until you understand why that belief is wrong. Often you believe in things and you eventually figure out why that's a wrong thing to believe in. But so long as you believe in something and you can't see why that's wrong, like the brain has to work somehow, so we have to figure out how it learns the connection strengths to make it work. So long as you believe in that, keep working on it and don't let people tell you it's nonsense if you can't see why it's nonsense.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Yasuhiro Kobayashi, and they were with the Yomiuri Shimbun newspaper. They ask, when will AI surpass human capabilities? What will happen as a result?
So nobody knows when, but most of the good researchers I know think it will happen. My guess is it'll probably happen sometime between 5 and 20 years from now. It might be longer. There's a very small chance it'll be sooner. And we don't know what's going to happen then. So if you look around, there are very few examples of more intelligent things being controlled by less intelligent things, which makes you wonder whether when AI gets smarter than us, it's going to take over control.
Thank you for Professor Hinton. We no longer see any other questions, but we are happy to stay on the line for a little while. If anybody has any last minute questions, please do use the Q&A toolbox you'll see at the bottom of your screen and give us your name and your media affiliation, please. We do have time for a couple more if you have any more. Another one from Rahul at U of T News. He asks of President Gertler. He's asking, how do you expect Professor Hinton's Nobel Prize to reverberate through the university and inspire scholarship in AI and other fields?
Well, I think it's going to have a huge impact and a very, very positive one. I was a very young assistant professor at U of T when another eminent scientist, John Polanyi, won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1986. And I can remember how proud I felt of our intellectual community when John got that wonderful news. And it has continued to have such positive impact, not just in chemistry, but across the University of Toronto. I think Jeff's win today will have a similarly positive effect, boosting morale across the university, but also helping us attract and retain fantastic talent. Jeff has already talked about that in response to a couple of questions today. And I think one cannot overstate the impact of a win like this on the ability of Canada, Toronto, and the University of Toronto to be able to welcome talented newcomers, great students, and wonderful faculty from across the country and around the world because of the recognition that arises with Jeff's win.
Thank you, President Gertler. We are now going back to Professor Hinton. with another question from Issam Ahmed from AFP. They ask, what are the exciting next frontiers for you in AI?
Okay, I'm 76 and I'm not going to do much more frontier research, I believe. I'm going to spend my time advocating for people to work on safety. I think there's very exciting frontiers in robotics, in getting AI to be skilled at manipulating things. At present, we're much better than computers at that, or than artificial neural nets. But there will be a lot of progress there. It may take a bit longer in that area, though. I also think these large language models are going to get much, much better at reasoning. So the latest model from OpenAI and models from Google, like the latest versions of Gemini, are getting better at reasoning all the time. And I think that's going to be very exciting to watch.
Our next question comes from Victoria Gibson. Again, she's at the Toronto Star, and this is for Professor Hinton. She asks, you offered some specifics on where AI can go poorly, such as cyber attacks, false videos, etc. Can you share some more specific examples of how you think it can play a positive role?
Oh, yes. So if you think about an area like healthcare, a large part of the Ontario budget goes on healthcare. It can make a tremendous difference there. So I actually made a prediction in 2016 that by now, AI will be reading all the scans that radiologists normally read. That prediction was wrong. I was a bit overenthusiastic. It may be another 5 years before that happens, but we're clearly getting there. AI is going to be much better at diagnosis. So already, if you take difficult cases to diagnose, a doctor gets 40% correct. An AI system gets 50% correct. And the combination of the doctor with the AI system gets 60% correct, which is a big improvement. In North America, several 100,000 people a year die of bad diagnoses. With AI, diagnoses are going to get much better. But the thing that's going to really happen is you'll be able to have a family doctor who's an AI who has seen 100 million patients and knows huge amounts, and will be much, much better at dealing with whatever ailment it is you have, because your AI family doctor will have seen many, many similar cases.
Thank you, Professor Hinton. We no longer see any other questions, but again, we do have time for one or two more. So if anybody on the call would like to ask any other questions, we again invite you to include your name and the media outlet you're representing, and type out those questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. While we wait for any of those last minute questions to come in, Professor Hinton, we are curious, is there anything that we haven't touched on during this press conference today that you would like to mention, or anything that we've kind of missed here with all the various press questions?
One thing we've only touched on briefly is the role of curiosity-driven basic research. So artificial neural nets, the groundwork was all done by university researchers, almost all done by university researchers, just following their curiosity. And funding that kind of research is very important. It's not as expensive as other kinds of research, but it lays the foundation for things that later are very expensive and involve a lot of technology.
Thank you. We've got another one here from Victoria Gibson at Toronto Star, possibly a follow-up to what you were saying about healthcare and AI. She says, why do you think we haven't yet reached the point you predicted where AI is playing a bigger role in healthcare? Are there any barriers left to this happening?
One barrier is the medical profession is very conservative. There's good reasons for that. If people die when you make a mistake, it's a good policy to be conservative, but they're relatively slow to adopt new technology. Another reason is I was just wrong about the speed at which AI systems would be better than radiologists at reading scans. they're now comparable with radiologists at lots of different kinds of scans and better at a few. I think in another few years, they'll definitely be better than radiologists. And what we'll see is collaborations between radiologists and AI systems where the AI system reads the scan and the radiologist checks that it didn't make a mistake. And after a while, the AI systems will be doing nearly all the work.
Okay, great. Thank you, Professor Hinton. That is all the time we have for questions today. So in the chat box, you will see an email address that you can contact if you have additional questions. You should see it popping up right now. That email address is media.relations@utoronto.ca. So at this point, I will now ask President Gertler to provide closing remarks.
Well, thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Jeff, and congratulations once again on this wonderful achievement, your Nobel Prize. I'm sure I speak for the entire University of Toronto community, and indeed for all of Canada, and for your many, many friends and colleagues and admirers around the world, when I say how incredibly proud we are of your achievements that have been recognized today. Thank you also to everyone for joining us today in this wonderful celebration. Cheers.